The spotlight was warm, almost blinding, and the air inside that packed room felt charged with admiration. Two legends stood shoulder to shoulder, men who had shaped an era, men whose names alone could command silence. The laughter had been easy just moments before. Then Frank Sinatra leaned toward the microphone, smiled that sharp, knowing smile, and delivered a line aimed straight at Dean Martin. It sounded like a joke. The crowd reacted on instinct, a wave of applause and scattered laughter rolling forward. But something in the tone lingered a second too long. Something in the wording felt less like camaraderie and more like a challenge. You could feel the shift before you could name it. This wasn't just playful teasing between friends. This was status, reputation, alpha meeting alpha under unforgiving lights. Sinatra's voice carried authority. He was used to leading the room, controlling its rhythm, bending it to his will. And now, in front of hundreds of eyes, he had drawn a line with a single sentence. Dean stood there, glass in hand, posture relaxed as always. But look closer and you would have noticed it, the flicker behind the calm. Because when a man is mocked publicly, especially by someone of equal power, the stakes are never small. The laughter began to thin. People glanced at one another, unsure whether to continue. Was this part of the act, or had something real slipped through? In elite rooms like that, humiliation doesn't explode, it freezes. Conversations stall, smiles stiffen. You could almost hear the silence forming between heartbeats. Sinatra waited, confident, as if the moment belonged to him. After all, he was Sinatra. He had built a career on commanding attention. And Dean? He didn't laugh. He didn't rush to defend himself. He simply stood there, absorbing the weight of what had just been said. 5 seconds can feel like forever when the entire room is watching you. What do you do in that space? Do you shrink? Do you retaliate? Or do you choose something no one expects? What Dean said next would change their friendship forever. Before that night ever turned tense, there was history. Years of shared stages, late dinners, private jokes, and a brotherhood that felt unbreakable from the outside. You have to understand that Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin weren't just co-workers. They were pillars of an era. The Rat Pack wasn't a brand someone manufactured. It was chemistry, charisma, and a kind of masculine glamour that made the world lean in. Las Vegas glowed differently when they walked into a room. Crowds didn't just attend shows, they entered a world shaped by their confidence. But even within brotherhood, there are differences that quietly shape the balance. Sinatra was precision. He rehearsed relentlessly, obsessed over phrasing, demanded loyalty, and carried himself like a general who expected discipline from everyone in his orbit. Control wasn't ego for him, it was identity. Excellence required intensity, and intensity required standards. Dean, on the other hand, moved through life like the rules didn't quite apply. He sang as if he'd just wandered onto the stage by accident and somehow outperformed everyone without breaking a sweat. The glass in his hand, the half-smile, the looseness in his posture, it looked effortless, and that effortlessness was power. Think about that contrast. One man striving, the other appearing not to strive at all. One gripping the wheel tightly, the other cruising with one hand draped casually over it. In any partnership, that dynamic creates admiration and friction at the same time. Sinatra respected Dean's talent, but how do you not feel something stir when someone makes brilliance look easy while you fight for perfection? And Dean admired Frank's drive, but what does it cost to stand next to someone who needs to lead every room? From the audience's perspective, they were inseparable. The jokes flew, the harmonies blended, and the camaraderie felt authentic. People crave that kind of unity. It makes legends feel human. It invites you to believe that loyalty at the top is possible. Yet behind the applause, small tensions can breathe quietly. Success magnifies personality traits. What once felt charming can start to feel challenging.
What once felt complimentary can start to feel competitive. Not everyone backstage was laughing all the time. There were moments when Sinatra's intensity clashed with Dean's relaxed indifference. There were whispers about reliability, about priorities, about who carried more weight. None of it explosive, nothing dramatic enough to shatter the image, just subtle imbalances that accumulate over years. And here's the deeper truth. The stronger the bond, the more fragile the ego beneath it. When two powerful identities share a spotlight, harmony requires constant negotiation. You don't always see the negotiation, you only see the smiles. But pressure builds in silence long before it ever surfaces in public.
The rhythm of the night felt familiar at first. Sinatra delivered a line, Dean fired one back. The audience laughed on cue. This was the dance people paid to see, sharp wit wrapped in friendship. But then Frank leaned in again, and something subtle shifted. He joked about Dean's drinking, about whether he'd even remember the lyrics, about how hard it must be to show up prepared when the bar was always closer than the rehearsal room. The words were framed as humor, but there was an edge beneath them, like a blade hidden in velvet. The crowd laughed because that's what crowds do when legends tease each other. Laughter is safer than analysis. It keeps the energy buoyant. Yet, if you had been paying attention, you would have felt it. The way the joke lingered half a beat too long. This wasn't just poking fun at a persona. It was touching reputation, work ethic, reliability, the kinds of things that define a man in his industry. When humor drifts toward identity, it stops being light. Sinatra didn't stop at one line. He layered another remark, sharper this time, implying that Dean's laid-back charm was just a polished excuse for not caring enough. The escalation was subtle, but deliberate. And that's how lines get crossed in public, not with a shout, but with accumulation. One comment might slide by, two might feel playful, three begins to feel intentional. Have you ever been in that position? Smiling because everyone expects you to, even when something inside you tightens? The audience sensed it before they consciously understood it. Laughter became scattered, uncertain. Some clapped, others shifted in their seats. The room, once buoyant, felt slightly heavier. Sinatra still held the microphone, still controlled the tempo, but control can blur into dominance if left unchecked. What made it sting was the setting. This wasn't backstage banter. This was in front of hundreds of people who admired them both. Public praise builds a legacy. Public criticism chips at it. And when the criticism comes from someone of equal stature, it lands differently. It signals hierarchy. It asks, without asking, who stands taller tonight. Dean stood there, listening. The easy grin that usually softened every jab didn't quite reach his eyes. He didn't interrupt. He didn't retaliate. He let Sinatra finish. That restraint changed the atmosphere more than any comeback could have in that instant. Because now the room wasn't just entertained, it was watching. Sinatra delivered one final quip, smiling as if the exchange were harmless. A few people laughed reflexively, but beneath the sound was tension, thin and unmistakable. This had moved beyond performance into something personal. The air felt different, like the moment before a storm breaks. And then it happened. Dean didn't laugh this time. Silence is uncomfortable because it forces everyone to feel what they were trying to laugh past. In that moment, after the final jab left Sinatra's lips, the room expected rhythm to continue. A quick grin, a playful shrug, another easy punchline. That's how it always worked. But Dean didn't move. He didn't sip his drink. He didn't flash the effortless smile that usually dissolved tension. He simply stood there, eyes steady, shoulders relaxed, breathing measured.
5 seconds doesn't sound long until you're the one inside it, when you're being watched, when your dignity has just been tested in public. The crowd waited for a cue, and none came. Sinatra's confidence lingered in the air, but it no longer felt dominant. It felt exposed. Because without immediate laughter to cushion it, the joke sat alone, stripped of charm. Look closely at what happens in a pause like that. A man has choices: react from ego and escalate, laugh it off and shrink, or absorb the moment and decide who he wants to be. Dean's face revealed almost nothing, yet that restraint spoke louder than any sharp reply could have. His stillness wasn't weakness, it was calculation. It was self-control under pressure. Have you ever felt that internal shift when you realize something playful has crossed into personal? Your body tightens first, your thoughts race, you weigh consequences in a split second. Do you protect the relationship or protect yourself? That is the crossroads of identity. And everyone in that room, whether they admitted it or not, began projecting themselves into Dean's shoes. What would I do? How would I respond if someone challenged my competence in front of my peers? The longer he waited, the heavier the air became. A cough somewhere in the audience, a chair creaking. Sinatra's posture adjusted slightly, just enough to betray that the expected rhythm had broken. Control had slipped, not through aggression, but through patience. That is the paradox most people miss. Silence can reclaim power faster than volume ever could. Dean's eyes moved briefly across the crowd, not searching for approval, not pleading for sympathy, but acknowledging the shared discomfort. He knew they felt it. He knew the line had been crossed. And by not rushing to fix it, he allowed the weight of it to settle fully on the room. Anticipation began to replace uncertainty. Now they weren't laughing, they were waiting. That pause did something subtle yet profound. It transformed the moment from a roast into a reckoning. Whatever came next would define more than the joke. It would define boundaries. And when a man chooses composure over impulse, the room instinctively leans closer because they sense something decisive is about to unfold. When Dean finally moved, it wasn't abrupt. He didn't snap back or raise his voice. He adjusted the microphone slightly, as if giving the moment the respect it deserved. His expression stayed composed, almost thoughtful, and that calm alone began to redraw the balance in the room. You could sense people leaning in, not for spectacle, but for clarity. This was no longer about entertainment. It was about truth. He started softly, acknowledging the jokes without denying them. Yes, he liked to drink. Yes, he moved at his own pace. The crowd gave a cautious ripple of laughter, relieved for a second. But then he shifted. He turned toward Sinatra, not with hostility, but with a steadiness that carried weight. He spoke about pressure, about the need some men feel to control every note, every spotlight, every breath in the room. He didn't accuse, he observed. And that distinction changed everything. Instead of attacking Frank's talent, he reframed Frank's intensity. He suggested that sometimes the man who works hardest to command the stage is the one most afraid of losing it. The words weren't loud, they weren't cruel, they were precise. It was the kind of line that doesn't sting because it's sharp, it stings because it's accurate. You could almost see the realization pass through the audience as they understood what had just happened. The narrative had flipped. Think about that for a moment. When someone challenges you publicly, your instinct might be to overpower them, to prove you're stronger. But Dean chose something rarer. He chose perspective. He implied that ease isn't laziness, that confidence doesn't always shout, and that needing control can reveal more insecurity than composure ever will. Without raising his tone, he reclaimed his identity. There was a brief silence after his final sentence, the kind that follows a statement people need to process. Then something remarkable happened. The laughter that had once sided automatically with Sinatra faded into thoughtful quiet. Applause began slowly, almost cautiously, and then built, not explosive, not rowdy, but respectful. The room had shifted its allegiance, not because Dean humiliated his friend, but because he demonstrated restraint under fire. That is calm dominance. It doesn't demand attention, it earns it. It doesn't tear down, it elevates itself.
In that instant, the power dynamic changed. Sinatra still stood tall, still a legend, but the invisible hierarchy had leveled. Dean had shown that strength isn't about controlling the spotlight, it's about remaining centered when someone tries to tilt it. And the line people remembered wasn't shouted, it was delivered with quiet certainty, the kind that lingers long after applause fades. The moment the curtain fell, the energy backstage was almost tangible, a thick fog of adrenaline, pride, and unspoken tension. Performances end, applause fades, but some moments linger longer than the spotlight allows. Sinatra, usually the embodiment of unshakable confidence, stood off to the side, his signature smirk there but tight, strained in ways only those who knew him intimately could notice. Did he feel the shift in the room? Did he register the subtle recalibration of power that had quietly taken place in front of hundreds, a shift that wasn't loud or dramatic, but precise and undeniable? Pride doesn't always speak in words, but it can weigh heavier than any critique, and in that rare private pause, you could feel it pressing against the air. Dean, on the other hand, moved with the same composure he had shown on stage. There was no need to replay the victory, no urge to punctuate it with triumph. Calmness was his statement now, and in it lay a subtle authority that neither words nor gestures could manufacture. It's fascinating how two men could occupy the same room, both legends, both commanding presence, and yet the room seemed to bend slightly toward one without a sound being uttered. The contrast was stark, one man's pride wrestling with reflection, the other's poise masking neither ego nor insecurity, only clarity. How often do we see that in real life? Moments where composure outlasts confrontation, where patience becomes louder than anger. Backstage chatter hummed, the kind of low murmurs that carry awareness of what had just transpired. Friends, colleagues, hangers-on, all glimpsing the rare vulnerability of Sinatra, witnessing it without needing explanation. He had always been perceived as untouchable, invincible, yet here was a crack, subtle but real, a private confrontation with his own need for control. Did he reflect? Did he consider the precision in Dean's quiet rebuttal, the way it had shifted perception without tearing anyone down? Perhaps he doubled down, returning to old habits, masking reflection behind humor or charm. The complexity of human ego rarely offers clarity, and legends are no exception.
In these backstage corridors, away from the crowd and cameras, the real story unfolded. It wasn't just a matter of who got the last laugh on stage, it was a quiet turning point, a recalibration of respect and understanding, subtle yet profound. Sometimes the most significant moments happen where no one else sees, where personal pride confronts truth, and the choices made in solitude echo far longer than any public display. What did it change between them? That question lingered like smoke, unanswered yet undeniable, planting seeds for a new dynamic in their partnership, one that would be tested and reshaped over time. There is an intimacy in witnessing such moments, the private fallout of public confrontation. The lessons are clear if you look closely. Composure has a resonance all its own. Pride can be a heavy companion, and the aftermath often tells more than the performance itself. Sinatra and Dean, in that quiet interlude, revealed layers of humanity beneath the veneer of celebrity, a reminder that even icons wrestle with ego, reflection, and the fragile threads of connection that hold personal and professional worlds together. Moments like this don't fade because applause ends. They linger, subtle yet profound, reshaping relationships in ways that only time and observation can reveal. In the weeks and months that followed, the echo of that single moment lingered far beyond the spotlight, quietly shaping the way Sinatra and Dean interacted both on stage and off. It's remarkable how one brief exchange, charged with tension and truth, can redefine a relationship, forcing reflection where once there was only habit. Their friendship, forged in laughter, camaraderie, and shared glories, now carried a subtle edge, a recognition that boundaries exist even among those who seem inseparable. Did it create distance?
At times, yes, but distance does not always signal rupture. Sometimes it signals respect recalibrated, a recognition of personal lines that, once acknowledged, allow for deeper, more authentic connection. How often in life do we mistake closeness for permission, assuming that intimacy erases accountability? Dean's calm assertion had reminded them both that even the strongest bonds are strengthened, not weakened, when honesty is introduced at the right moment. On stage, the dynamic subtly shifted. Sinatra's sharpness, once untouchable and brash, was tempered by the memory of that evening, a quiet awareness that control and dominance have limits. Dean, meanwhile, carried himself with a new gravity, the kind that comes from silently asserting one's values without raising a voice. Performances continued, but with a nuanced interplay now evident to anyone attuned to subtle cues. The Rat Pack's glamour remained, but beneath it, a more sophisticated understanding had taken root, an emotional literacy that audiences could feel even if they could not name it. Isn't it fascinating how a public confrontation can become a private lesson, not in humiliation, but in self-respect and relational equilibrium? The laughter that had once defined their exchanges now shared space with mutual recognition, a deeper layer of authenticity beneath the showmanship. Over time, that evening came to symbolize more than a joke or a roast. It became a boundary, a quiet declaration that friendship, no matter how legendary, is not license for disregard. They both grew from it, Sinatra in moments of introspection, learning the weight of words beyond their immediate impact. Dean in the power of measured response, discovering that restraint often communicates more than retaliation. Can one moment truly redirect a lifetime of interaction? In this case, it did, shaping both their professional choices and personal interactions. They learned in real time that respect is earned and maintained, not assumed.